articulate that. I don't know if you know, is there a way to connect that sort of a Platonic view of God to problems with modern atonement theory, for example?
Yes, certainly is. So are we live yet?
Yeah, we're live.
Okay,
So
sorry, I didn't know. Would you like me to go ahead and explain that?
yeah, absolutely.
Good. So that is my most basic, fundamental correction point of Western Christianity. Western thought began being defined by Plato in the sense that there's a spiritual world and a natural world. God exists in the spiritual world that is timeless. So we have these two worlds. And Aristotle built on that. Almost all the philosophers of that time period, which was starting 400 years before Jesus, up through early Christianity, the philosophers were thinking of two worlds, a spiritual world and natural world, spiritual world being timeless. But then a guy named Plotinus, he's usually credited with Neoplatonism, reviving Plato's thoughts, but adding a few things to it. In particular, he said the God who exists in the spiritual realm radiates all his attributes. Because he's timeless, his attributes must radiate out of him forever. You can never turn them on or off. So that includes his wrath, his beauty, his love. Everything God is radiates out. Now, Plotinus was not a Christian, but Augustine studied Plotinus's writings for over 9 years before he became a Christian. So Augustine has the same concept fundamentally of God, that God exists in a timeless world radiating his attributes. So now that one picture to me shows where the atonement got off, total depravity got off, and almost every other subject that is associated with Reformed theology. So, picking the one that you mentioned about the atonement, if God radiates out his attributes, he radiates his wrath, and he can never turn it off. Therefore, man's problem is sin, yes, but more importantly, it's the wrath of God that we need to be saved from. Well, what is the only way that the wrath can be stopped? Because God cannot stop it. If he's timeless, he must radiate it eternally. Therefore, we need a wall between us and the wrath of God. And that's what Calvin tried to solve with his understanding of the atonement, penal substitutionary atonement. We need a wall between us and the wrath of God because God can't turn his own wrath off.
Hmm.
So there's 3 steps. God is a just God. He must punish sin. Jesus took on that punishment. So those 3 steps. God is a just God. He must punish sin. First of all, when Calvin said that, God's a just God. He must punish sin. He is saying God cannot forgive sin. That's just a different way of wording God cannot forgive sin. If
Mhm.
God radiates out his wrath eternally, timelessly, cannot turn it off, he cannot change, therefore he cannot forgive sin. Both Augustine and Calvin believe God cannot forgive sin because that's to change. If you change, then you're not timeless. Therefore, they had to come up with another explanation for salvation. It's not to forgive sin, but it's to block sin. Jesus needed to be the wall between us and the wrath of God. And so God took his wrath out on Jesus. So the penal substitutionary atonement, the reason it was necessary is because of their concept of God radiating out wrath. God must radiate out wrath eternally because he's timeless, as Plato said. So it's Plato, Plotinus, Augustine, Calvin. All of them have the concept of God radiating out wrath. Penal substitutionary atonement has been the only explanation that's ever been proposed that solves the problem of a timeless God who radiates wrath. There's no other understanding of atonement that's ever been proposed that can solve the problem of radiating wrath. However, the problem then, I've rejected penal substitution, therefore I have to go back to Plato and Plotinus, solve the problem back there. God radiating out wrath. I don't believe God is timeless. I believe he can turn his wrath off. In fact, wrath must be an attribute because it can never be turned off. But I don't believe wrath is an attribute of God. I believe his wrath is a subset of his love. God is love, but because he loves, there are times when wrath will be released because of people violating his love relationship. But
Mhm.
wrath is not an attribute that 24 hours a day, for every day, throughout eternity, must radiate from him.